a few minutes after 6 o'clock, so we're going to begin. We thank everybody for coming out tonight. Appreciate your presence here. It makes a difference. And also, Charlie Scott is recording this event so we can put it on our ACTV and learn all about historic tax credits. So tonight, we are blessed with our special guest of Gene Rees. Gene is a generous man with his time and his money and his efforts, and he has told me that he is willing to come to Sparta and present this idea for us. It's been successful for everyone around us, and we're 30 years behind, is my opinion, and it's time for us to catch up. So, Gene, we are so appreciative of you being here tonight, and we're excited to learn about this new idea. Thank you.
Thank you. My dad had a clothing store. He opened right after the Second World War, and we're still there. Been there 72 years. My wife's from Sparta. I'll just tell you, this is my wife Peggy, and my in-laws Paul and Cornelia Reeves. And I will tell you, if we were not living in Mount Airy, if we weren't so tied into Mount Airy, we'd be living here. That's how we feel about it, and how I feel about it too. What Karen asked me to talk about is National Historic Districts. And just one thing I'd like to ask you, some of this stuff is a bit complicated. So as we're going, if you have a question while I'm talking, just raise your hand right then and we'll address it. So I don't want to get away from it and for you to have questions about some of the things I'm talking about. And that's my notes, they're 5 lines long. But what Karen had asked about, I'm aware of your downtown revitalization efforts, that you're spending $4.5–5 million on streetscape. And I've seen the streetscape. I think you got an ARC grant to fund that. That's good, really good. And some towns, which comes first? Do you want your heavy private investment first, or do you want heavy government investment first? And you're taking some heavy government investment up here, and hopefully that'll stimulate a lot of the private investment. Mount Airy's been a little bit different. Our city has been very committed to the downtown, but ours has been very much a self-help program where there's been a substantial amount of private investment that preceded the government help. And one thing we have in Mount Airy, not that it's right or wrong, most towns don't like it, we have a municipal service tax district downtown. We have a county rate of, I think, 58 cents. Our city rate is 60 cents. And then downtown property owners pay an additional 20 cents to the city, which in turn, dollar for dollar, is given back to our downtown to be invested, or as I say, let us waste it any way we want to waste it. But that money has been a very targeted money. Our downtown tax rate, by the way, I've been working over 40 years, our downtown tax rate used to be over 40 cents on top of a 60-cent municipal rate. But with that money, we did all the things that you're doing in your downtown now. Our rate has come down over the years as we've paid things off. But what I'm going to talk to you tonight is about National Historic Districts. And when Karen called me about it, is anyone aware what National Historic Districts are, first of all, and what that provides for a community? The U.S. Department of Interior, through the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office, have all over the United States, and certainly all over North Carolina, there are these identified districts that have some inventory of properties that are historic in nature. It has to be 50 years old, or something historically significant has to have happened to it. Allen House, that courthouse in Hillsville, Virginia, had a very historic event with the Allen Courthouse tragedy. That courthouse, by virtue of that courthouse massacre, would be a property on the National Historic District. Most communities and most towns will, in their downtowns, to help stimulate economic development and to help guide the preservation of these historic buildings in your town, the towns who have an interest in doing that to help stimulate downtown redevelopment, how the process works. The town, someone in Sparta, either the town, the county, a private foundation, or individuals, you would engage a historic preservation consultant. There's one up here in Southern Virginia that does it. There's one in Winston-Salem and one in Concord. And for a town like Sparta, you'd spend $15,000 or $20,000, no more than 20, but maybe $15,000. And this person would come to Sparta and they would do historic research on an area, probably your downtown, and they might say it needs, the boundary would stop here and it would go up to there and it would be this wide or maybe 3 more streets wide. But this person would identify, they would come to Sparta and do some historic research in the library, the courthouse, talking to individuals, and they would basically do a little term paper on each building and what you think your boundary will be. And they would talk to folks, whether it was the city commissioners, whoever the sponsoring or the people who hired them, they would talk to them about where the natural boundaries of your historic downtown would be. And so at some point, they would just say the boundaries from this street to that street and the side boundaries are here to here. And once that boundary is established, they would do research on each of the buildings within that boundary. Marcia's building would obviously be one of them. And there would be some research done on that building. They would talk to her. They would go to the courthouse. They would look at old Sanborn maps, which take you way back. And if the buildings meet the 50, and each building, by the way, would be identified. Your courthouse would probably be identified as what's called a pivotal building, meaning it has a very high level of historic significance. Most buildings will be, that are historic would be identified as contributing. Your building would be a contributing building. The Muddy Creek building would be a contributing building. And those buildings would be eligible for historic tax credits once they become certified as contributing. There will be lots of buildings. This building we're sitting in would be what's called an infill building, meaning it has no historic value. Its renovation would not allow the owner to derive any historic tax credit benefit for the renovation. And then there will be other buildings that would be called intrusive, which someone messed up by putting this building here because it's architecturally inappropriate and it's not appropriate for a downtown. So anyway, that preservation consultant you hire would do this inventory for you, and they will bring you a nice little document that will be 30 or 40, 100 pages long or something. Each building will be numbered. There'll be a little write-up for each building about the historic nature of it, the architectural features of it, the things that cause it to be contributing or intrusive or non-contributing. And once that is done, that's a document you'll keep for generations. And you would add to it, because every 50 years, more buildings become eligible if they have architectural importance. But that document is the document you use. So as these buildings change hands over time, if someone buys the Muddy Creek building, and that building has not been altered from the time the survey was done, and Muddy Creek looked like this, and if that building is not significantly altered 5, 10 years from now, and you decide you want to renovate that building, then that renovation will trigger federal and state historic tax credits, which will benefit the person doing the renovation. And that, does anybody have a question about that, first of all?
How long is the process to have
The survey.
the survey completed?
And this is not like a boundary survey. This is a survey examination of properties. Once you engage somebody, the actual survey will take probably 3 or 4 or 5 months, a few months, and then it would be submitted to the state archives, state preservation office. They meet every quarter or a few months, and they would review, have comment. Some buildings might be taken, the boundaries might be twisted a little bit, and that would take another 3 or 4 months. So probably a year process. But once it's done, there is a single document that will forever identify the architectural importance and architectural features of individual buildings throughout this defined area. But the reason that's important to you, we've all been to a lot of towns in North Carolina, but the towns you can think of in North Carolina, the downtowns in North Carolina that are doing well, and it can be from Hendersonville to Brevard to West Jefferson to Mount Airy to Salisbury. I mean, there's a gigantic list of these towns that have used this program to help stimulate investment in your downtowns. What it does for the property owner, it allows them to renovate a building. It works best, by the way, on buildings that are really deteriorated. Now, we're getting ready to renovate a building in Mount Airy that has no roof on it. And why is that better than renovating a building that's improved? Well, here's why. If a building is eligible for historic tax credits, it's a contributing building in the survey document. If that building is eligible for historic tax credits, and the tax credits in North Carolina for this county are 20% of what you spend to renovate it in qualified expenses. And there's a list of qualified expenses, a list of non-qualified. But you would receive, as a owner of that building who renovates it, a 20% tax refund from North Carolina for every dollar you spend to renovate the building. So it's in your best interest to have a building that needs a lot, not to pay as much for it and to spend a lot on it. Likewise, the federal government has a 20% federal tax credit that piggybacks on top of the state 20% credit. So if you own a building, now there are all kinds of qualifiers. If you own a building in downtown Sparta, Sparta is a National Historic District. And by the way, being in a National Historic District does not prevent a property owner from doing anything to your building. If you want to put in drop ceiling and you want to paint it green and tear off all the cornice brickwork, you can do anything. They don't prevent you from doing anything. And you can tear your building down. But if you want to get the tax credits, you have to renovate it consistent with the design guidelines from the National Park Service. And they have a list of architectural guidelines for renovation. It's on their website. And it says, for example, if you have windows, you had windows in a building during what's called its period of significance, basically when the building was built. If the windows at that time this building was built were double sash windows, and then these windows have since been bricked over, if you renovate it, you've got to put those double sash windows back. So it's not more expensive to renovate to comply with the national standards, but what it does for your town, it makes your downtown have the same kind of character it had when it was first founded, during those years it was founded. And these buildings will have the same appearance and character they had when they were built. And that's why towns that we all like to go to, the buildings you really find very desirable typically are the ones that have been through this historic preservation program. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Can a building owner look into this without this whole survey having been done?
Okay, the question, like, can you renovate a building and get tax credits on it if your building is not in a historic district?
No, if that survey has not been done.
Oh, if the survey's not been done, you're not eligible.
So that $15,000 or whatever it is, to have that survey done?
Yes.
In the town?
Yes.
Has to be done first?
Yes. Well, you can be eligible, there's three ways, but there's two common ways. One is you hire a preservation consultant to do the survey. As I say, there's one in Winston, there's a guy named Dan Pizzoni up here in Virginia that does it. The second way you can do it, you can have your building, you can yourself have your building individually certified as a National Historic Property. Now, one of the buildings, I've done two individual certifications. The standard of eligibility is much higher to have a building individually listed. We did the Key City condominiums down in Wilkesboro. Well, that was the first manufacturing plant down there. It as a standalone, it was eligible. That building you're looking at, that brown building, is the Renfro Hosiery building. That is an individually listed property. But it was a very significant, it was built by R.J. Reynolds. It was very significant in and of itself to be eligible, but it's very hard. It's also very expensive to get a building individually certified. That building worked because it was 120,000 square feet, so all the it cost about as much to get a building individually listed as it does at district. But the scope of a project like that, you can afford to do it. The only reason that building had to be listed individually, it was not in an area, well, the Key City and go to Wilkesboro, that building was sort of out by itself. It was clearly it was not surrounded by buildings that would typically be included in a district. So if you've got a building that's sort of out in the county, you've got some houses in this county, by the way, that would be individually listed. And it doesn't cost $20,000, but it would cost you probably $5,000 to get a building individually listed. And yes, you can do it in the downtown, but that's not the right way to go about it. The best way is to do a boundary, a district.
There's one house in the county listed, isn't it?
Say again.
No, at Jarvis, I think.
You have some listed in Allegheny County. I don't know where they are, but there's some.
I was thinking like one in maybe the courthouse.
That could be. The courthouse probably is individually listed. But at any rate, this process about the renovation of it, first of all, nonprofits obviously don't use the tax credit. But if you're a taxpayer and you have a building if you have a downtown building in a district that's in the historic district, and number one, your renovation, you have to spend more on your renovation than what's called your adjusted basis. So if you buy a building for $110,000 and you want to renovate it right away, you back out your land value. You can use tax value for your land value. So the land's worth 10. So you have 100,000 in your building. That's called your adjusted basis. The requirement, if the building's a contributing building, if it's eligible, it's in a district, the next requirement, you have to spend more in qualified rehabilitation expenses than your basis in the building. So you pay 110 for it, you deduct 10,000 out for the land, say the land's worth 10, you've got to spend more than $100,000 to fix it up. And if you spend more than if you spend $100,000 to fix it up, you will get a $20,000 federal tax refund, and you will get a $10,000 state tax refund. So you will get $40,000 back. Yes.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't quite understand.
How the tax credit works. If you purchase a building in a National Historic District and you purchase the building for $110,000, deduct the land out, and after you deduct the land out, that becomes your basis. Now, if you've had the building a long time and depreciated it, your basis is way lower than 100. But if you bought it yesterday, you're going to start renovating it today, take off the land value, you have to spend more than 100. You spend $100,000, your state tax credit is $20,000, your federal tax credit is $20,000. Now, I will tell you, up until this year, North Carolina had something called the North Carolina Mill Rehabilitation Bill. It was another section of the state tax code. This mill in Wilkesboro, and we just finished another mill in Mount Airy, that mill received, for what we spent, for every dollar we spent, we got 20 cents back in federal tax refunds and 40 cents back in state tax refunds. So 60 cents of every dollar we spent was refunded back. And I gave the tax credits to my buyers. These were condominium buyers. I gave them the tax credits with their purchase price. If we had a condominium, these were high-priced condominiums from Mount Airy. They sold from $180 to $500 something. That was expensive. If someone spent $200,000 on one of these condominiums, they received a $120,000 tax refund.
And that's not available anymore.
No, the mill credit expired. Well, it's been changed, but it's diluted down a little bit. I think it'll probably come back, but for Sparta, downtown Sparta, you're not eligible for that. You're going to get the straight old vanilla 20% federal, 20% state tax credit. Well, the question then, how do you do the renovation to be compliant with the design guidelines? You don't have to hire an architect. You can submit your own paperwork, and I will tell you, if any of you have an interest in renovating a building downtown, I'll do it free. I'll help you. I don't do this for a living. I run a clothing store and do my real estate stuff down there. But if anyone has an interest in renovating a building, Peg and I come up here a lot. We'd love to sit down with you and talk about it. But if you decide to renovate your buildings, for the community, what it means for the community, when the building's put back in circulation, of course, it'll help your rents, but you can include any expense you spend on that building, including a roof, a heat pump, fixing the basement, getting the basement from leaking. Anything you spend inside the perimeter walls of that building is includable for calculation of your tax credit. Anything you spend on your parking lot is not includable. Any detached signage is not includable. Window treatments are not includable, but most everything you spend inside is includable. And that's why it's so important. It's not important, but buildings that are severely dilapidated benefit a great deal more than buildings that are already in good shape. Okay. Couple of things with respect to using this tax credit. There are limitations on how much you can use. So if you're not a realtor, if you're renovating your building that you use in your trade or business, you can apply that tax credit. You have to pay income tax in to get the credit back, by the way. But if you use it in your trade or business, if a dentist moves to Sparta and opens a dentist office in a historic building and renovates that building for his practice, then he has no limitation how to use that credit. However, if you buy the building and you rent it to me, and you're simply a passive income owner of a building, and you're not a realtor, a real estate professional, they call it. If you're not a real estate professional and you don't use it in your own trade or business, you rent it to a second party, then you have to have passive income tax liability, meaning you've got to have some rental property paid for somewhere that causes you to pay income tax. Because the most federal, it's just on the federal side, the most federal tax credit you can take in any given year is limited by the amount of federal income tax you pay on your other rental property. So you take all your rental property income and put it in a bucket, deduct your expenses, and if your income tax on that rental property income is $5,000 for that year, then the limit of tax credit you can offset for this building is $5,000 for that year. I'll tell you how good this federal credit is. Now, this is all changed with the tax reform of 2017, the Trump tax reform, whatever they call it, changed this. But prior to that, on that 20% federal tax credit, if you bought this $110,000 building, you spent $100 on it, you got a $20,000 tax credit against, in that case, it's against your tax liability. And let's say you're a realtor or a real estate professional, or you spend $500 hours a year on real estate, you're considered a real estate professional. You can take that federal tax credit and apply it against your entire federal tax liability for that year. And let's say you used $15,000 of it, you couldn't use the other $5,000. You are allowed to take that remaining $5,000 of federal tax credit and carry it back into a prior year and use it. And if you still haven't used it all, you can carry it forward 19 years. You had 21 years to use the federal tax credit. After the Tax Reform Act of 2017, that federal tax credit no longer has that 1-year carryback. It does have a 20-year carry forward. And also on the federal tax credit now, you cannot use it all at one time. I mean, that was huge. In the first year up until last year, you could take all the tax credit in 1 year and what wasn't used and carry it back to last year, and still what wasn't used, you take as much as you can, as fast as you can for 20 years until you use it. Now you take the federal tax credit, it's awarded, you get the $20,000, and you take it what's called ratably. You take it in 20% of it a year over 5 years. And if you still haven't used it, then you can carry it forward until you use it up until 20 years. Yes, sir.
Still on passive income, right?
That is on passive, well, unless you meet the real estate professional requirement or you use it to try. Real estate professional, I think, unless that's changed in this last tax reform, but in the past it was 500 hours spent on real estate activities in a year. It's facts and circumstances. Your accountant will interpret it. So, on the state side, now your state credit's also 20% now. The state credit has no carryback provision. You start taking it the year in which you place the building in service. And you have, if it's income producing, you buy it and rent it to me, then you have 10 years to use the state credit. You can use it as quickly as 5, take 1/5 of it every year for 5 years, and the unused portion you carry forward for up to 10 years. All right, anyway. No, the state, that's a good point. On the state credit is applied against any source of income. The dividends, wages, rents, whatever. No limitation on the source of income. But the reason the state, and for what it's worth, the federal tax credit was, federal tax credit law was passed and sponsored and endorsed and supported by Ronald Reagan. And he's the one that drove it through the federal government to get it in place. That's how long it's been in place. It has been this awesome program. Now, it's hardwired into the federal tax code. The state tax credit has a 5-year sunset. Every 5 years that thing expires. It's getting ready to expire this year. And then the state legislature has to renew it. When Pat McCrory was in office, it expired. And the state legislature, they repealed the state historic preservation tax credit, the film credit, and the solar credit all at one time. Well, Governor McCrory, of course, it was a Republican legislature and he was a Republican governor, but he had been a mayor, and his Secretary of Cultural Resources, a lady named Susan Klutz, who had been mayor in Salisbury, she was on his cabinet. And they understood how impactful this program is to towns and all over North Carolina. And so he put her on the road for 6 months, and she had this giant Department of State government she was running. She took 6 months off and went to 50-some towns in North Carolina, and a good many of them twice, to advocate for this. And she brought a team into Raleigh to advocate with the legislature, and she got it, and McCrory got it reintroduced into the state law. And they used, one of the towns they used was Mount Airy about how effective this program is. And for the state, though, the benefit for this program, we've done a lot of calculations on I've done a bunch of this kind of redevelopment. The state gets back for every dollar they give you in state historic tax credits, if that becomes a business, they get back by year 5, they get back on average $6.35 in hard money, payroll and sales tax, where they get it. Now the county doesn't get as much, city certainly doesn't get as much, but what a city or town gets is a renovated downtown. And I can tell you it works. I mean, I've done it a long time, I've done a lot of it, been to a ton of towns, know a lot of developers that do this kind of work. Good many of the tax credits around the state are done by large syndicated developers who will do great big projects like this, and they will sell those tax credits to third-party buyers. It's called tax credit syndication. Doesn't work on a little building, but a building that's, say, a $5 or $10, $20 million renovation. Yes, sir.
If you do that to somebody that has the income, can you get to an aggregator of tax credits if they can go to buy your tax credit, sell it as a package to other investors?
Good question. Okay. He's talking about what's called tax credit syndication. If you own a building, Marsh's building is I hate to pick on Marsh, but that's a large building, big footprint, big money renovation. You know, what's the threshold for a tax credit syndication? Most of the syndications, well, we get an apartment built on the Spencer's property we're working on, a developer in Durham's doing it, and it's about a $6 million project, not a huge project, and he's going to syndicate it. The reason building owners will syndicate or sell their tax credits, they sell for about 80 cents on the dollar. You will sell to Blue Cross Blue Shield, Sherwin-Williams, Chevron, I don't know, there's a bunch of companies that buy them. They will buy those tax credits from you for about 70 cents on the dollar. Now, well, the federal credits sell for 90 cents on the dollar, the state credits sell for 70 cents on the dollar. What that does for the building owner, if you have a renovation and you cannot use a tax credit yourself, or the renovation's big, you can sell the tax credit to a third-party buyer. They will write you a check upon when you place it in service and turn the lights on. They'll write you a check, your tax credit amount. And so if your tax credits on the building, on that $100,000 building, let's say that was $10 million, and the tax credits are $4 million, they'll write you a check for about $3 million for that $4 million. They'll take $4 million off their taxes, and they'll use it right away. You get $3 million in cash to help your numbers work. That's done all the time, but that's typically done on larger projects. And I don't do syndications. I'll either use them myself or transfer them if they're residential buyers, I'll transfer them to them. But the syndication works. The Innovation Quarter in Winston, all that stuff, that's all syndicated tax credit work. American Tobacco in Durham, that's over $1 billion in development, all tax credit syndications where the developers did the renovation and sold them to Blue Cross Blue Shield, I think, bought a lot of those. I don't think there's much in Sparta or in Mount Airy, for that matter, big enough for these syndicated projects. And I'll tell you, here's the problems with syndications. The legal and accounting fee, it's called cost certification fees, are expensive. You have to go to get these fancy lawyers and accountants to figure this stuff out, the people who do that, but the fees are huge. So by the time you pay these fees, unless it's a very large project, a syndication probably doesn't make any sense for you. You can, however, in Sparta, North Carolina, or Mount Airy, you can renovate a building and you can bring in an equity partner who can use that tax credit. The federal and state tax credits can be disproportionately allocated to partners. They can be disproportionately allocated. You've got this partner that's got gigantic income, and you've got this smart guy that owns this building that doesn't have enough income. And that tax credit can be distributed disproportionately to ownership. So this high-income guy, you can give him the tax credits, and he can give you more cash. And you can do that on your own without a lot of fancy syndication expense. It's like a certificate transfer of tax credit certificates. And that's what I would recommend here. If you can't use them yourself, find somebody you trust, you want to have a partner. The only requirement for that partner, if you're using federal tax credits on historic preservation, there is an absolute hard 5-year required holding period. If you sell that building in less than 5 years, get out your checkbook because you will have to pay it all back with interest and penalty. Require any partner using federal tax credits on an income-producing property has a 5-year required holding period. So if Blue Cross is your partner, and let's say it's a big project, so they're going to buy your tax credits, they will become a 99%, this is the way it's typically done. They take 99% ownership, you develop it. And before you place it in service, placed in service means the lights work and the commodes flush, et cetera. You get your certificate of occupancy. You bring Blue Cross Blue Shield in, they're a 99% owner, you're a 1% owner, and then you're their partner for 5 years. And in 5 years, there's a ownership swap, basically. They exit, you keep it, and you got your property. I hate to call Blue Cross Blue Shield out, but I mean, they're just one of the tax credit purchasers. But you could also do that privately. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Is there a problem acquiring monies when having a deal like this?
Well, we'll tell you now, if you're selling your tax credits to a third party where there's definitely an equity injection coming in, then that will be considered on a loan application. If you're just using tax credits yourself to offset, then the tax credit benefit to you will have no bearing on your loan, how much you can borrow, what the terms are. And it's not even, and you don't know, when you do this tax credit application, you'll have your building certified as contributing, so you get this little paperback. It's called a Part 1 certification that says, yes, my building is certified, and you have a little paperwork, 1 page. And then when you get ready to renovate, you'll have you can hire an architect to submit plans. This is your blueprint submittal. Or you can not have an architect and do sketches. If it's not a complicated job, you can do sketches, but then you have you describe in writing how you're going to do your windows, what you're going to do for your floors. And you'll take pictures of your property. You'll go in your building, you'll go into Marcia's building, you'll take before pictures of her building, and you document with a picture, and you say this, I'm standing in this spot on a blueprint, and you'll have picture number 14, it'll show me looking at that corner. You'll do that all over your building, roof, basement, outside, inside, to have picture evidence of what this building looks like now. And then you submit your plans. I want to remove those vinyl windows and put in appropriate metal clad windows. You describe the extent of your work. You submit that application. It's called a Part 2 application to the federal government, to the state, and then both state and then federal. They'll get back to you in about 60 days, and they'll say, yes, you can do those things per your Part 2 application. You'll do this to the roof, this to the windows, et cetera. Then as long as you do that work consistent with what you said you were going to do, and if you have a change, you file an amendment that the floor didn't work out like I wanted, I'm going to change the floor. But absent file an amendment, when you finish your work, you will submit picture evidence of work, of completed work, from those same positions in your building that shows what this corner looks like now, and the reviewers, the architects at the Park Service will review your work now, what it looks like now versus what it looked like before. And as long as you didn't mess up something, then you will get back what's called a certificate of completed work, a Part 3, which is that Part 3 is what you file on your taxes and take your credit off of. And that will have a total of how much you spent, and and you multiply that by 20%, take that off your federal taxes, multiply it by 20%, and take it off your state taxes. But what it does for the town, it changes the look of your town. I mean, I can tell you it works, and town after town after town, it's a very effective tool. And just as importantly, it helps. Most people don't understand, this is not a fair statement, but a lot of folks don't have a clear understanding of appropriate rehabilitation of buildings. They're running a store or running an office. And the federal and state guidelines, they are so helpful to help you identify the architectural elements of a building that are important. Architectural elements that are consistent with what that building looked like when it was first built. And there are architectural elements that will help you rent the building. And I can tell you, I rent a bunch of buildings. It helps you rent them. And it helps you rent them for more than you would otherwise. So it is a program that works. Any other questions on that? I'm good. I'm all right there.
I would interject just a little bit here. I'm not a designer, I'm not a decorator, I'm not anything that order. I'm not creative, and I don't notice details lots of times. And I went to this North Carolina Main Street meeting, and it was brought to my attention why you want to keep the thick, and I don't know the proper terminology, the thick windows. original windows in these storefronts,
Yeah.
plate glass. And they taught us in that class, if you change those windows out and you put in a new looking window, it doesn't look like the original building any longer. It takes a different look and it takes away. And I've already seen one of those, renovation on Main Street. And then I came home after that meeting and I immediately saw that window. So it's little things that you may or may not have noticed. I never noticed it when I lived here all my life.
I'll tell you some things you have in Sparta in your downtown. We have them in Mount, every town has these. Buildings that were renovated in the 1960s and the facade's been covered over, either with stucco or vinyl or metal. And they're, because of that work, if you do a site survey, those buildings that have the facade changed, maybe someone's put metal over them, those buildings will be considered non-contributing. Now, your building owner's going to be upset. He's going to say, well, heck, I've got this 100-year-old building that's not eligible for tax credits. How the building owner would handle that, the building owner would remove those disqualifying elements of the facade. Typically, it's a facade cover. They'll take that stuff off, show evidence of what's behind it, that it's not been defaced behind it. And as long as the building behind that metal is fairly intact or can be made to be intact, then you would resubmit what's called a Part 1, evidence of that building, and you want to have it changed to be contributing, and contributing triggers the tax credits. That would be done a lot in your downtown because you have a lot of facades that have been altered. And I want to show you some stuff right here you'll get a kick out of. Can you take it back to the very beginning, to the first one? I've got a number of buildings that have these metal fronts on them, and you have to tear stuff off to keep on going back to the very beginning. This right here, we'll start right here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, not that we're doing stuff right, but our town does have this we've had the national district since the 80s, by the way. But in 2004, our downtowns, like a lot of others, had struggled. And we had this group's out of Greenville, South Carolina. They did a little study for us. Our town's never done a streetscape like yours, by the way. I'm very envious of that. But we did have what's called a West Side Development Plan, how our downtown could grow. We were a third vacant in the 1990s downtown. And some of us who were there, that to us seemed like you had to make a commitment, not having any proven success ahead of you. But that's when buildings were very inexpensive, and a number of us loaded up on buildings. But in 2004, we still had these vacant buildings. This Arnett Muldrow plan identified the west side, how our downtown could expand, where we have all these vacant mills around our downtown. This is acres of vacant mills. How do we deal with that? Well, this study did that. That thing sat on the shelf for about 12 years. And we couldn't, our city, nobody knew what to do, I put it that way. No criticism of anybody, but move on just a minute. We had one of the first big projects. This is the Renfro Hosiery Mill, and that's that dark brown building. That's about 120,000 square feet. And that was a vacant hosiery mill, been vacant for about a decade. And we converted that to condominiums. It was looked at for low-income housing. The city planning department turned it down. I purchased that building and converted it into residential condominiums. It sold out very quickly, but this was the first project in I think in the state, but certainly one of the first in the state, where the tax credits were, of course, tax credits go to the developer. I was the property owner, but we had to go to the Internal Revenue to get this approved in the state, but we were able to be a conduit for those tax credits and pass them along to our buyers of these condominiums. So if a person bought a condominium for $200,000, and most of them didn't use the federal tax credit because they were not renting them, they were living in them, so they just got the state credit. At that time, the state credit was 30%. So if a person bought a $200,000 condominium, they got 30% of $200,000. It's a little more complicated than that, but they got about a $60,000 housewarming present. Well, obviously, we sold that product, 37 units, sold it out fast. But what that meant to our downtown is we had residential housing downtown, and the residential housing that had an income level to help support the businesses downtown. Anyway, so that was one of the first projects there. And the next one, click that thing. The next one was Well, okay. And this is a little street beside it. This street had been vacant for about 20 years. So I should have brought you some before pictures. These buildings were tear downs. And anyway, this street got kicked off, and now we have 2 microbreweries, a little bit like Muddy Creek. This is where the White Elephant is, and Dr. Crick's. Yeah, and that was a vacant cab stand, and now that street on nights is full. And we have nice young people. This has been probably the single largest new resident recruiter we have in our town. Yes, Market Street. And that was done, I was a little ahead of myself on that. We did the first buildings there. No one else had done any of the other buildings. About one side of the street, the rest of the side was vacant. And I had a number of failures there because there was nobody else that jumped in yet. But once the other breweries jumped in, the street has been great. It's been great for a few years now. But anyway, that's catalyst investment. Yes, sir.
What you call a fill-in project within the historic district?
It is, yes, sir. And these are National Historic Properties, every one of them. Yes, sir.
So all those were old buildings?
Yes, they were. Yep. Yes, they were.
So they're actually contributing.
They are contributing buildings. All were eligible for tax credits. And that, I don't remember what these renovations cost, but the economics of renovating these buildings without the tax credits, it just simply doesn't work on most of them. Y'all know that. But, I mean, it takes these tax credits to make the economics of these investments work. I'll try the next one. Then, I don't know what happened after that one. That's a little building beside it. Not the ones that was in, a local attorney did it, those 2 green ones, and that brick one we did. But that building was a downtown drink house. It was an 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. bar. And he was beside those buildings you just looked at, but it was a problem for that street developing. But anyway, now it's a really nice, it's an extraordinarily good store, but it was restored back to its original thing, original look. What's next there? All right, this right here, what is this? Let's see. Well, this is just, that's just that. This is to give you a perspective. These buildings you're looking at were right, this is Market Street right here. And then this West Side Development Plan, the 2004 development plan, was for all of this side of town. So this was phase 1. Excuse me, this is phase 1. Right here is Market Street. Look at where I am. Right there's Market Street. And then what we were after next is all this mill property. So right after this followed, or right before this followed those Renfro mill condominiums over here. This came second, and then Marcia hit the third one of these condominiums here. This was the Spencer Mills, which was a baby wear manufacturer. Can you click that?
Did a hotel go in down there too?
Well, we'll get to that one in a minute. Is it clicking in another direction? Well, these are some downtown buildings. This is 1890s building. That's a good building there, but you can see this, while we're on this one, you'll see some of these design elements. You're in the North Carolina Main Street program. UNCG for the North Carolina Main Street program provides facade design assistance for all your Main Street towns. They'll do this for y'all now, whether you're in the historic district or not, but they'll help you determine how these design corbels should look like, what these little strip canopies should look like, exactly how the paint colors, they'll do this. And that's part of the North Carolina Main Street program benefits. And y'all have that, you're eligible for that now in Sparta. All right, right here is Market Street. The dark mills were here. This was one that just finished. And this is called the Spencer Loft condominiums. These sold for between 180 and 500. A number of them were over 400. There again, this is one block off Main Street. And what this means to your downtown, again, you've got 35 people living downtown that have disposable income that will hopefully trade in your businesses. And then having Market Street here, well, Market Street's actually here, I'm backwards. Market Street's here, excuse me. This is Market Street. These are the condominiums, a little alleyway between. But again, this was about this added about 30 more people downtown. And and this was all historic tax credit. This building had been vacant for a very, very long time. This is 1890s. There's the Renfro lofts right across the street, and these are the Spencer lofts. And now there's a development, you see the little skywalk. Well, this tall building is the hotel building we're working on.
Okay.
I'm not working on it. We're this group of us working on it. And this one here, this is one, this is how incremental development works. One building good development spreads to another building. So this started on the main street, it's kind of worked this way, just like Sparta would do. Works this way, and now it's pretty healthy down to here, so we're starting on this. And if you notice, this building has no roof on it. So that's a historic building. This is a barrel roof, it's about 5,000 or 6,000 feet, and this will be a city convention center. Well, why is that important? It's going to be privately done. Okay, go to the next one there, Karen. And this is about the incremental nature of development. And here, this is Market Street. Here's the Spencer's condominiums. Here's the Renfro condominiums. And right off the page here is going to be these apartments that look kind of like this. And this is where the hotel's going. This will get torn down, and this will be the convention center. This is going to be private. This is owned, but it's not developed yet. This we're working on. We think we got a hotel developer signed up in the last few days. So we'll see. All right, go on to the next one. I'll show you a little bit how that works. This is just another view of that. This is Market Street right here again. And this is all, but you can see how pretty it makes your main street look. And when you're recruiting a new teacher in town or anything in town, or recruiting young people in town, these are big drivers for that. But you can see but a good many of these, most of what you're seeing here are historic preservation renovations. Okay, next one. And this is the next step, at least for Mount Airy. This is the Renfro condominiums, that big dark one, that 100,000-foot building. Here's the loft, Spencer's Lofts that just finished. And right here is where we want, the apartments are in construction right now. They're about mid-construction. This is a developer out of Durham, came up here to do that. And then this is, we're doing the convention center here. And these X's are all the tear down. These are all the add-on buildings like we all have. There are some buildings that get sacrificed. These are not historic in nature. And this right here, Jeff Cox has something to do with this, will be our culinary school for our town. Our community college and the Providence Kitchen out of Winston-Salem, they have an instructional program. Jeff Bacon, Chef Jeff. Yeah, but that's put together, it's done. Yes, sir.
Wonderful.
And there's about $6 million in grants coming to this. Yes, sir.
And your history of development, starting back whatever, if you put that through, or at least a blueprint of what you wanted to attract in the town, or you just let it go willy-nilly, do the building, and that build, they will, no matter what will come. Or did you have so we need these kind of
Yes.
stores, these kind of
Yes.
businesses, to support this kind of business, so a very integrated approach
Yes.
to understanding what you wanted when it was done.
Yes. That Arnett Muldrow study, that's on the City of Mount Airy's website. Now, the Arnett part of it did exactly what you're talking about, where our leakage was in retail sales, where we did pretty well. And so it helped us target. That building that had those fancy mahogany front and all that copper on the front, that we recruited an outfitter store there. I mean, it was a cool building, and it would help. It was an easy recruit. But it took a building like that to bring a mass-type person to your community. But yes, we did identify that. And we fail all the time, obviously. You miss on some, you hit on some. But yes, and if you haven't done, the North Carolina Main Street program will do that for you. They'll send a group up here. Yes, sir, ma'am.
Do you remember what year it was when you came up here and talked about this? Because you've already come up.
I was up at the 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, Shirley Richardson called me about it. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago that the developer and the owner, that the developer is credit, not the owner. Keep those infos on.
I use those interchangeably. The person who gets the tax credit is the owner on the day the building is placed in service. You can renovate you could be a builder or a developer, and you can renovate the building all the way to the last day. The owner of the building can pay you for that work and have a deed to it that next day. And then if you get the CO the day after that, the person who has the deed, the person whose name is on the deed on the day in which the building is placed in service. And typically, the placed in service date is the date on which you get your certificate of occupancy. When the codes people sign off on it, the building can be occupied, and that's considered typically a placed in service date. So whether it's the developer or the owner or the builder, whoever's name's on that deed that day will get the owner, and it cannot be changed.
Was it a few years ago there that, Martha Theater?
Yes.
Which one of those buildings was
Right, the Barta Theater, that was a big blow up, and y'all should get me started now. The Barta Theater, our city had, we'd already done the condominiums down here. The city bought all this stuff at auction, paid $100,000 for the whole thing, and they somehow decided they were going to have the apartments, a hotel, the Brookstown Inn out of Winston-Salem, and the Barta Theater back here. And it just, the city spent about $1 million in that. They didn't spend any money on renovation, they spent $1 million in soft costs, development costs, architects, tax credit advisors. And I can't not be critical of that process because they tried, and I was a little bit involved in it because we were doing the condominium piece of it. I just agreed to do mine first, and we were done a year, and they were still fighting among us. It was a struggle for them, for our city. But anyway, that all fell apart. So now it has gotten recast, and there's our downtown development group is, and I am involved in that, is bringing some other players to the table. And it's in place, probably going to happen in the next week. The city bought the buildings for $83,000. They bought this side of the street for $83,000. I bought this side of the street for $18,000. And then we spent a lot of, this was an expensive renovation. This was way up in the millions of dollars. This right here, when it's completed, well, actually, all of it counting ours, this will be about $25 million. The Barta it was a big deal from out here, but the Barta transaction was so one-sided. The city was at such risk, and to the commissioners, to their credit, walked away on it, as they should have. And then no criticism of the Barta; they were just protecting themselves. But it was too bad. But the problem with the Barta Theater arrangement, the city had to do all the work. The city was going to be on the hook for $500,000 a year for 20 years, another $100,000 a year in subsidy forever, $2 million to the Barter to show up. And then the Barter had a 3-year walkaway provision. I mean, it was painful. And it was painful for somebody that does a lot of historic preservation to watch that process happen. And it hurt our town, and it was unbelievably divisive in the town. But I think everybody involved in it, including all the commissioners, had good intentions, and they did their very best. It's worked out the way it should have, and the way it's working out now, the hotel developer, the apartment developer, the culinary school, these are very stable. It's not swinging for the fences. This is a very meat and potatoes. You know, it's not as much money. It's only not counting our condominiums, it's going to be about $20 million, and that's a gigantic development for our little town. And it'll be another help for our downtown. Now, and my point in saying all this stuff, every town's different. You know, we're never going to be the size of a Winston-Salem or even a Salisbury, but each town, whether it's a Sparta or Mount Airy or Winston or even Charlotte or Durham, the relevance of this program still applies. And the benefit it provides your community is identical in Sparta. Actually, it's probably more important in Sparta than even in a Charlotte, because little towns like we all live in, we need things to attract young people to live in our town, because those young people will start companies and teach school and create jobs. And you better have this stuff in place if you want to be recruiting them. I will tell you on our Spencer's condominiums, these right here, we have a company in town called InSteel, a great big steel company, huge steel company. We had 3 of their executives, one from Missouri, one from Arizona, and one from Florida, to buy units in there. It's amazing. I mean, but they wanted to live downtown. They were mid-50s, and they're great. That's a great addition to our town. And they could have lived in Winston, driven up, but they're living in Mount Airy. They go to church in Mount Airy. They're they're active in things, and that's what communities want. That's what we certainly want, and I think that's what y'all want. You know, you have all these assets that we don't have. You have this natural beauty that most of the rest of us don't have, but you also have, this is a smaller county, so you just have to figure out if this program would help you. I can tell you for certain it will help you, but somebody has to spend the money to have the survey done, and you may find in the survey they may not think there's enough property to do it. and that could happen. But you will know, at least you'll know. I don't think that's the case. I think you've got plenty through your downtown. It's just deciding where the boundaries would be. And then if you choose to do this, and I don't promote it, I'm just telling you I think it'll help you. If you choose to do this, it's equally important after you become a national district that you educate your property owners, because people don't understand it. I can tell you, these condominium owners, we pass this credit through to the condominium owners, they understand it. Because once they got word of that they were going to get they were going to get all this big tax refund, they're beating our doors down to buy them. We have to turn people away who are inappropriate buyers. We have all these tax credit buyers. They don't care a thing about Mount Airy. They just want to buy the tax credits. Well, that's not what we were after. We want people to live there. So it required some discipline on our part to make sure we sold to people who had the best interest of the community and who were legitimate buyers. You need to live here if you want to live here. The tax credit's just a present to you. And that was at least the philosophy we tried to use.
Aaron certainly done a lot of neat things. I love the historic museum.
It was great.
From Winston with my kids all the time to see things. And while they were at the museum, I would go shop and have lunch.
I mean, it's fun to have been in it long enough to see the real benefits of a program like this. And the federal and state government, they see it from a national perspective. And there's probably, I don't know how many states, 35, 40 states have state programs. And then, of course, the federal government has a national program. But it is a game changer for a town. And it doesn't cost anything. That's the thing. And it takes away no rights of a property owner. Not one single thing are you disallowed from doing. But if you want the tax credits, you renovate it the way they want you to. Yes, ma'am. Hey, Peg. That's my wife. I almost met her. Sorry. Okay. You don't get it. You have to have tax liability to use the tax credit. So you've got to pay taxes in to get taxes back, to get them refunded to you. You don't just get a check in the mail unless you've paid all your taxes in for that year. That's all I have, unless you have any more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what's the smallest historical district that they have, I don't know if it's certified or what it's called, but I'm just curious.
It's way smaller than Sparta.
Okay.
There are a lot. You can look it up on the state website. There are districts, like a Salisbury, for example. Salisbury has a downtown district, and they must have 5 districts around their town. They'll jump over here 4 neighborhoods, and they'll have a residential district. Then they'll jump over here and have another second commercial district.
So there could be multiple districts.
Absolutely.
That would add together.
Yes.
To make
Yes. In fact, in Mount Airy even, our first district was our downtown district. And we hired we used Dan Pizzoni on this last one. And I think there are 4 more districts going in that are part commercial, part residential. I think 2 of them are contiguous to the downtown. It's like a boundary extension. And then 2 of them are just out just away. They're separated from the downtown area. But they have enough property. That survey determined there was enough historic inventory in that new recommended district. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
What is painted brick? Some of our buildings on Main Street have got painted brick.
Okay.
What does that do?
It doesn't disqualify anything. Doesn't matter what color it's painted. As a general rule, on the renovation of a building that has unpainted brick, that brick cannot be repainted, period. No, it's a disqualifier. However, if your building is painted brick, number one, the fact that it's painted and painted a bad color won't keep it from being contributing. Number 2, if the brick is painted, you're allowed to use that color. You're allowed to repaint it. You're allowed to remove the paint, but not sandblast it. Sandblasting is a disqualifier. These apartments in Mount Airy that the guy from Durham's building, he's a very experienced large developer, and they're using pecan shells to beat the paint off the brick. They've got some big compressor in there doing that. But on ours, every time we have a building that's been painted, we just repaint it. It's cheapest and usually looks pretty good. But you cannot paint over unpainted brick. If you have window openings in your building that have been bricked up, typically they'll require those to be reopened unless there's some fire issue. If you need to brick up a window that's there and you want it bricked up, then you have to recess your brick 2 inches to show evidence of a window. And these stuff is pretty simple, but that's why you want a contractor that's done a little bit of this kind of work. But it's not hard.
I know that you can't tell us exactly where the limits would be, but is it logical, as small as Sparta is, to encompass the city limits, the entire city limits? It's not residential.
I don't know. I would think that'd be a stretch. Like when you get down towards Trojan Village, I don't think there's enough. I mean, that's a good area too, but from a historic perspective, I just don't think it's
Well, I mean, like,
appropriate.
for instance, the buildings that are across from Sparta Elementary School.
Yep.
They're old.
Yeah. Yes,
So
ma'am.
The village is 47 years old.
Mm-hmm.
There's a block house across from it that is probably 100 years old. There are, they're just different ages when you're looking. This building right here, I mean, it's more than 50 years old, but it was definitely changed from its historical. And the bank next door, the one that's down Fifth Third, I mean, it was here when I was little.
Well, the good thing about now, we're seeing buildings we grew up with that would meet the 50-year requirement.
Yeah.
But the buildings also have to have, the Farmers Hardware is one, I mean, that one's a key, that, it has historically visible features, I guess, or elements, they call them. These outline buildings, I don't know about that, but you would have this person would determine all that for you.
So I guess the first step there, you would have to have enough people involved to come up with the money to hire this
Sure.
person to do all this stuff.
Or at least, what I'd do, I'd call, there's a lady named Laura Phillips in Winston-Salem, she would probably be the one I'd recommend, or Dan Pizzoni, lives in Virginia. They're the two closest to you. They're historic consultants. And they could come up here, they don't charge you to come up here and talk to them about it and ride them up and downtown, say, what do you think? And Laura will tell you right then, this just won't work, or it will work. And it'll cost about this, and then you'll know. She may want $40,000, but I don't think you're talking about any big piece of money. I think it's 15 or 20. Yes, ma'am.
Talking about Marcia's building again. Marcia's building, I remember, used to have apartments upstairs, and there was a beauty shop upstairs, as well as the business downstairs. And
Actually, my building is two separate buildings that we made a building before.
Well, in that case, that would show up in the survey. And what would happen, they would, if you renovated your entire building, you would have two separate applications. They would be done together. You would do the work together, but you'd have to apply separately.
Would the wall that was removed have to be replaced?
Not necessarily. And if you have a building that's pretty open on the upper level that doesn't have defined apartments, then you have pretty much an open slate what you put back, which is kind of nice. But if the building has defined apartments in it, then you'll be, to some degree, like if you have an old hotel. I'll tell you other buildings that are coming on stream now, by the way, this reminds me. In Kinston, North Carolina, there's a real good developer down there that has a brewery company.
Yes.
He's got good guys. Mother Earth, they're good people. But he renovated one of these 1960s roadside motels. It is extraordinary. It met the 50-year requirement, and that's a period. We think about the 1800 buildings ourselves, 100-year-old ones. But these buildings that were built in the 60s, the 1960s, these motels we all remember are coming on stream. And that's the first one I remember in the state. It is an exceptional redevelopment. It's high impact for the town. It generated every dime of tax credits, and I think it's doing well. So you have a motel or two here that might meet that. It will meet the 50-year standard that might even meet the architectural standard.
I think all our hotels about that period of time is done.
Well, it may be. Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah. Any, yes, ma'am. Oh, hey, you.
going back to Marcia's building, I can remember when there was a stairway between the Rainbow store and the other store. There was a tea room up there. There was a little jewelry store that was about as big as a closet. There was the county library, that was the first place I think that we had a library. And that was fascinating because you went up the steps and there would be a little tiny alcove, that's where the jewelry was. And you'd go up another landing and there would be Miss T, and
Aunt Myrna had a
all right.
And that's at the stairs in between the two buildings.
You know, when the preservation person comes up, when they were doing this, would be doing this survey, they would want to talk to you. And, because that's part of how they derive all this information.
So would a logical next step for this would be to invite Laura Phillips from Winston Salem up here to, I don't know if you would want another council meeting, or we can talk about that.
I just talk to her. I just sit there, 2 or 3 people sit down and talk to her, yeah. Sure she would, yeah. Yeah, she's good. Absolutely. She sure would. She's speaking in Dobson tonight. She has a book she just came out with, yeah. If she's good, she and Dan Pizzoni both are really good. There's a lady named Diane Young in Concord that does it also. Okay. Well, look, Sparta's awesome. I mean, we love it, and I love you downtown. I mean, it's real, it's good. Well, you're special to me. Yeah, you are. Yeah. All right. Well, thank y'all very much. Go ahead.
Before anybody leaves, I want to close with thanking Gene for coming, and I want to accentuate his generosity. When he's talking about these condominiums, well, the story in Mount Airy is that people were standing in line fighting over those condominiums, and it was over the confidence in Gene Rees. So he's a smart and generous businessman. He did, as you heard him say, he didn't take the credits. He gave them to the condo owners. So that, and he wanted the town to prosper. He wanted those people to go to the churches, and he gave us, North Carolina Main Street folks, a tour of one of the condos, and it was amazing. And you know what I saw? I saw some things in their condos that I also saw in the stores in downtown Mount Airy. I also, we were sitting there having lunch, and I looked, and on the street, on the main street, were walking young professionals, which is invigorating for your town. So, Gene Rees, I think you get a lot of credit for Mount Airy's new look, and we're excited for you and appreciate you coming up here, and you are part of Sparta, you and Peggy. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.